Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Hang on, let me get organized here. I am going to talk about place. I might depress you a little bit at the beginning, but it has a happy ending. I'm going to use a timer to make sure I don't keep you here till the long lunch that we're promised. So, we humans have created a bit of a mess for ourselves. And the good news about it is I think we realize that we've created a bit of a mess for ourselves. And there are many ways to come at understanding what's happening to us, but I come at it from economy and from a recognition that we have allowed a techno-economic logic to subsume any kind of social or ecological logic. And that economic system is basically eating up life so it can feed itself. And we're part of that. And clearly we need to rewire it, and we need to rewire it in favor of place. I hope everybody that's watching online can see the slides, but anyway, I'll read it just in case, because this is one of my favorite quotes from, I think he's a science fiction writer actually, that every snowflake in an avalanche pleads not guilty. So we are funny creatures, we humans. It's as if we have this tormented relationship with the reality that we are physical, embodied creatures. We have invented tools like money, which is just a tool, and information technologies that are abstract and virtual. And we are so incredibly easily duped by our own tools that we've really set up a kind of not a good tension, actually, between our physical embodied selves and the abstract world of our tools. And if you think about our biological needs, for example, water, food, air, shelter, probably missed some. If you think about for food, that somehow we've managed to industrialize that, and the food we need is often on a container ship stuck somewhere on the way. Air and water we've polluted because the economic system we have is really, really good at producing waste. And shelter, somehow we've financialized that to the point that it's obliterated from existence. And when you think about our psychological needs of safety or to feel safe and self-esteem, we increasingly look for online to get those satisfied, and we come away anxious and depressed. So anyway, that's the depressing part of the talk, but I think that's kind of where we're at. And as Stanislav Lech says, we are all victims of this, and we're all perpetrators. And I'm sure we all know people who lament the loss of our local bookstores as they busily order on Amazon and don't make the connection. Or are busily advocating to have no Airbnbs on their street, but happily stay in them in somebody else's city or neighborhood when they travel. So you got to love us humans, because it's who we are. We're not devils and we're not angels. We're just humans. So clearly, I think we need to reconcile our physical lives with our virtual lives, and especially as it relates to the way the economy works. And I think place is a powerful way for us to approach that. And I'm going to talk about place through the lens of a place that I know well and where my work is these days, and it's my home, called Fogo Island, and I'm in Halifax, so I know. I can't imagine there's a person that hasn't heard of Fogo Island by now. I do think that a small island is a decent proxy, maybe not perfect, for a small planet, because in a small circle has the same number of degrees as a big circle. The difference is, in a small circle, you can actually see the whole. And so that's why we like to do small studies. It's like small islands are labs. You can see the flows, you can see what's happening, and extrapolate to the bigger situations. Most of the pictures I'm going to show you, by the way, are Fogo Island. So there it is. I think we had another little hurricane come up yesterday. And there it is, Fogo Island. Most people, I would even say most people in Atlantic Canada, probably hadn't heard of Fogo Island until this happened. And I want to tell you that this is the least important thing about Fogo Island, is this building. It's a Trojan horse, this building, for a set of ideas that I'm going to talk about today. But the power of the digital age is, this is what people think of when they think of Fogo Island. That inn, I think about it as a cherry, one cherry on a centuries-old cultural cake. And that's what I'm going to dig into a little bit. And there it is. It's 10 little communities, I grew up there, that really didn't know each other until the 60s. And so we had centuries of making a living in these tiny little places, knowing that there were people over there, but not being tangled up with them. We got municipal government not only in the 70s, I think. And when we started our projects as Shorefast 15 years ago, we had 5 mayors, 5 town councils for 2,500 people. Now, we've amalgamated since that, but we're still learning how to live together on our little island better. Our culture and our way of life and our way of making a living is derived from this noble fish. And we built structures like this. We fished like exactly, this is a photograph from Placentia Bay, but I wanted to show it to you because that's a cod trap. When we were fishing for the 350 years in the inshore fishery, we fished very close to home. We never really went further than 5 miles offshore. And this is a cod trap. That cod trap is attached to the shore by a line called a Shorefast. And so our foundation or our organization is called Shorefast because it's a metaphor for all of us. May we be shorefast in our place. Then this happened. It took no time at all. This is a piece of technology. We invented this, we humans. It took no time at all to take just about every last fish out of the ocean. Lambert was my father, he had absolutely no understanding of what was happening. He could see what was happening, and he used to often lament who in their right mind would fish day and night and not expect that the fish are just going to be all gone. And he finally figured out, even though he didn't have economic logic, because we didn't even have a bank at that point, he said, they must be turning the fish into money. And he didn't have the word financialization, but that's essentially what was happening, and he knew it. So there's a long and painful story of the resettlement of Newfoundland and Labrador's outport communities, which is best described by a line in a song by a group called Seminai, which is, they moved without leaving and never arrived. And when I think about the massive amount of migration that's happening on the planet now, and I can point to a lot of failures of the economic wiring that's causing that, it's casting people from their homes. On Fogo Island, we were not resettled because of a small miracle that came in the form of art. What was happening at the time when the cod fishery collapsed, it is true, and one cannot hold this against the political leaders of the day, that we didn't have running water, we didn't have health care, we didn't have roads, we didn't have an education, my parents couldn't read at night, and then suddenly there was no fish. So that is a bit of a problem. However, what I do hold against them is they didn't stop to really understand what was going on, why it was going on. It was just, let's retreat. Except when the National Film Board showed up with Memorial University and started asking some questions around what is actually happening here, it really brought people together in a way to think about their predicament and to focus on their assets. And I know there are probably lots of practitioners here of asset-based community development, but that's essentially what happened in the 60s. I was 10 years old. Out of that process came the Fogo Island Cooperative Society, which owns the 3 fish processing plants on Fogo Island to this day. It is one of the best examples we have, I think, in our country of community ownership, direct community ownership. And this is our main industry, and may it always be so, because this is what holds our relationship, our most fundamental relationship, which is our relationship with the sea. And these structures that you see here still exist. We try to save as many as we can, even though we don't fish this way anymore. So this is Lambert, my father, and that's me. That is not a real dog. It's a very strange story, this picture, but what is interesting to me about this is I am 63 years old now. And I have lived in 3 centuries already. I lived in the 19th century when he was an inshore fisherman. And we lived in a community that felt very intact. He had deep social logic. He knew how to get along with people he didn't really like and who he had different opinions from. And he knew how to make a living on the North Atlantic. And when he made that statement about they must be turning the fish into money, he said to me, you have to figure out when you grow up how this money system works, because if we don't understand it, it's going to eat everything we love. And so my career was largely in wave division multiplexing. I was the chief financial officer of this, it's called a tech company, but to me it was a manufacturing company. We made wave division multiplexers, which are all the parts that enable the digital age. So these are the 3 centuries that I have seen. And that fellow is Joseph Strauss, by the way. He's very recognizable in the tech world, but he used to come in every day. I could go back to that quote. He used to come in every day and say, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. And what he meant by that, we were a technology company, is stay ahead of the technology. When I joined that company in 1989, we were 89 people. When I left in 2001, we were 40,000 people. I'll give you an example, we bought 40 companies in 2 years, the last 2 years I was with the company. So I went around the world, I saw an awful lot of things in an awful lot of communities. We tried to be good owners if we were buying a company in Australia or Switzerland, but ultimately we were distant owners. And that really has shaped how I think about economy and how I think about business. Let's go back to before that. Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, which everybody thinks perhaps is a bit twee, but I encourage you to get it out and read it. And his 2 great sentences, that nature and culture are the 2 great garments of human life, and business and technology are the 2 great tools that can and should serve them. This is, I think, the most important thing. And I think we've made the turn, we humans, to try and get business and technology to be servants of nature and culture. And culture is really no more than a human response to a physical place. It's the sum of our human experiences in a place. And we have had this exactly wrong, especially in the last 51 years, since Milton Friedman's 1970 article that said the purpose of a company is to make profits for its shareholders. So I think we've moved past this. We now have the Business Roundtable, and no matter how cynical you might be about that and about business changing to serve a greater number of stakeholders, I think the tide's turned. So I went back home about 15 years ago and set up this registered charity of Canada called ShoreFast, and now we all know what a ShoreFast is. It's a tether, and that is what we're about. Actually, some of the thinking also comes from an urban planner named Gil Chin Lim, who came from South Korea to the United States, I think in the 80s. And he was the one who said, we have to create a global network of intensely local places. And to do this, we have to get the economy to work in a way that it supports place and people where they live. This is how we're organized. On one side, ShoreFast is a charity. We run some social businesses, and the biggest one is the Inn that you saw earlier. And we have a whole set of charitable programs that really all have to do with knowledge. Holding on to knowledge, sharing knowledge. The biggest one is probably the art program. And I think about all of this and I think about Fogo Island as a floret. It's a fractal, right? Cauliflower is a beautiful fractal. Fogo Island is a tiny little floret. Halifax is a bigger floret. Mexico City is a bigger one again. All these florets are where we live. They're all held together by the stem, which has 2 jobs to do. Number 1 job, hold us all together. And number 2 job, bring nutrition to the florets. And we have an economic system that has been starving the florets of nutrition. And then the only florets that get to survive are the really big ones that are financial centers. So this to me is the challenge, and the opportunity is to just rewire the economy. There are many ways to think about this. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I do like the work of John Fullerton at the Capital Institute, who I think has the best description of what a regenerative economy is and how it can and should work. I think it's always good to keep icebergs in mind, especially here we are on the northeast coast of Canada. I think we spend too much time arguing about the events at the surface. And as Mayor Savage said, all of us with our very strong opinions, I think it's good to have strong opinions. We should hold them a little bit more lightly, maybe. But I think the real answers are found the further down the iceberg we go to what are the mindsets that we are holding that are keeping us stuck. And the biggest leverage points are the further down the iceberg. So in our work, we followed what many people have done in the area of asset-based community development, which is about enabling the local. These are the questions that we ask and answer all the time. What do we know? What do we have? What do we miss? What do we love? And what can we do about it? And to go back for a minute to that 1968 Fogo Island, where too many people looked at it and said, well, there's nothing there. And then along come a group of people that help us see that everything is here. Everything we need is here. We just have to learn to develop it properly. And not all investment is development. And every time someone talks about economic growth, I always feel slightly queasy. But we should talk about economic development and deepening the economy. And to do that, we need to have the eyes to see our true assets. And then how do we get business models that develop them properly and therefore invest properly for the benefit, not just of income, but for the benefit of community wealth. And so when we think about assets on Fogo Island, these are all our assets. These are the things we love. Even the ice. You know, last year there was no sea ice, even though we're in the Labrador Current. Even the icebergs. We employed design as a tool in the service of place. And when we were having designer meetings, they were more often like this than they were in a conference room. We started with something called Fogo Island Arts, which is a residency-based contemporary art program, because art is a way of knowing. Art has a way of pointing to the things that we don't see with our reductionist minds. They're like, John McKnight calls artists reverse magicians. Magicians make things disappear. Artists make them appear. And so obviously I can't say enough about the importance of art. We built some studios. We have been building things out of wood on Fogo Island for centuries. We'd never built anything contemporary. And Todd Saunders, the architect who grew up in Gander, we gave him a very simple brief, which is you have to figure out how to express in contemporary architecture what we have learned in the centuries of lived experience here on this rock. And I think he did a good job of carrying the past in his work. This is Arthur, who works at the inn to this day, who helped build the inn and the studios. And to figure out some of these studios, all the drawings would come in a big package, and Arthur and the team would sort of go, we don't work this way. And they would make a model scale of the thing and then build it, just scale it up. Kate Newby, one of the first artists, there are 4 of these studios. So now you see the relationship between the past. Like, what are we going to do with the past? What should we do with the past? Well, we have to carry it with us in some way. And good design and architecture helps us carry the past because it, like art, it's always in a conversation with what came before. So I think Todd's work is good in that way. Once we had the studios built, we started to think about building the inn, which was a much bigger project. When we reached out to government partners to say, would you come in with us and help us get this thing built, we actually got a letter back that said this, that it's not normal, practical, reasonable, or rational. It isn't if you're using techno-economic logic. If you are using social logic or ecological logic, or even, I would say, enlightened economic logic, it makes all the sense in the world. And I also came out of the tech world, and every time someone says that something's not doable, that's when you know you got to get busy. So we got busy and we built the darn thing. That's actually Todd Saunders. And it was like a big knitting project that took us 3 years, took us 7 years to plan it and 3 years to build it, or as my brother says, 7 years to argue about it, and 3 years to build it. And of all the things written about it, this is the thing that I love the most, that it is an act of human culture. And hospitality practiced properly is absolutely a way to reinforce culture. How we welcome people, how we feed people, how we care for people is all to do with who we are as people. And we can talk a lot about tourism, which I think about as a visitor economy, but really I think about it as hospitality. And in case I forget to say it, there are two things required for what is called sustainable tourism. Number one is it can't be our only industry. Otherwise, we will have our grannies out selling trinkets on the street. We have a fishery. That's why this makes sense. And secondly, it has to be the right scale for the place. We're 2,500 people. And as Phyllis Call said, we can only love so many people at a time. That's why it has 29 rooms, not 129 rooms. And that, once you make those really fundamental decisions about what is it you're optimizing for, we're optimizing for place and community, well then the business model needs to follow that. We all know that this is true. This next photograph is not from Fogo Island. I just put it there to say, why do we build this? This is the output of techno-economic logic. Payback period on this is probably 20 years, and it's going straight to the landfill. This is an example of the waste generation that our conventional way of thinking supports. Anyway, we don't have to build like this, and I'm very happy to be here in Halifax in a building that wasn't built like that. So we'll move past that. So once we had the structure of the inn figured out, we realized the hard work was just starting because we had to figure out what to put in it. And it didn't make sense, even though they make beautiful furniture in Italy. Didn't make sense if you're making a project that strengthens community and strengthens culture in a place called Fogo Island to put Italian-made furniture. So we started into this enormous project to take the knowledge of building wooden boats and textiles and translate all of that into new objects that in themselves could become businesses, which is kind of what happened. People like Jim Edwards, he lives on Change Islands, he understands how to collect wood. He's going to make something. He starts by collecting the wood in the right time of the year, the right phase of the moon. And so a chair connects us to that knowledge and helps us not lose that knowledge. We have a long history of making furniture in Newfoundland, and here is Elaine Fortin, who is a designer from Montreal, and she worked with a boat builder named Don Wells, and they came up with this chair, which is called a punt chair. The boat's called a punt. So this is the most direct example of taking traditional knowledge and giving it new form. But I want to pause on this to say, we really should expect a lot from a chair, because the quality of our lives is the quality of our relationships. Objects can help us make meaning, but not if they're anonymous objects that have emerged out of a system that we don't know anything about. Consumerism isn't that we love things, it's that we don't love things. We love novelty, and so things end up in the landfill. When you come home to an object that you know where it came from and who made it, it has meaning to you. It helps support our lives. So I think all objects can help support our lives. We just need to give them a chance. Lillian, who led a whole team of people on the textile side. Anyway, the result of all of these collaborations, this was all part of the 7 years, was the inn. And all the objects that you see here, except for the binoculars and the lamp and the glass, which you can't see, we made. And all of that really became part of economy on the island. And so just to flip through it, you know, despite all the amazing things that have happened in the last 10 years or so in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador doesn't have a big, long history of culinary excellence. So when we started with that which is near. And when you think about it and look around, we have everything. We have 26 kinds of edible berries that are all waiting to be turned into something. We have all the creatures of the ocean, so that's what we built the cuisine around. And that actually caused a return to growing. We had always, because we didn't have contact with the mainland, we always fed ourselves somehow. We abandoned our gardens in the 70s when the ferry started running every day. People have now returned to growing. So I think the that one of the challenges we have, and I'm going to talk about this in the context of community a bit later, is the quality of our awareness of what's going on around us is often not good, which is why we argue about stuff, because we can't even agree on what's happening. And so we became a little bit obsessed with this idea of economic transparency, and everybody knows about the label on food, and most people wouldn't eat something without knowing what's in it. We chose tea. I don't know why we chose tea. There's nothing in tea, apparently, except a little bit of salt. And we just copied the format of this, and we practice what we call economic nutrition labeling. For everything we sell, we simply tell you where the money goes. We operate our businesses as social businesses. I actually think all businesses should be social businesses. We aim to get a 15% surplus or profit that we then reinvest, if you remember from the other slide, back in the charitable programs. We don't always get it. We certainly didn't get it during COVID because the inn was closed for 15 months. And then we just tell you where the money goes. And then we tell you where it goes geographically. Imagine a world where everything that's offered for sale has this label. We could all then make buying decisions that line up with the things that we value. This is doable, just as the food label is doable. This was the title of an art show from, I think, a few months ago in Europe, which I really love, that everything passes except the past. And as I asked earlier, what do we do with it? How do we carry its learnings and not be handicapped by it? Like old buildings. All of my life, buildings like this on Fogo Island have been falling down. And when we get up as residents of a place and see our cities or our towns falling down around us, it doesn't make you think this is a going concern. And so we became very caught up with, we got to restore as many as we can. And we restored that one, which is now the home of the furniture business that came as a result of the building of the inn. And of course, we do the economic nutrition labeling for the furniture business as well. We started a little company that complements the work of the co-op, taking hand-line cod and some of the shrimp products and some of the crab products and selling them in an unmediated way. Doesn't change hands through brokers, getting from Fogo Island to Toronto. Let's say we sell it directly in Toronto. And as a result of doing that, you can go to some lovely restaurants in Toronto and see Fogo Island. And we do economic nutrition labeling. Now, I can't see this even with my glasses, but if I remember, I think if you go down to the bottom, 69% of what we sell the fish for in Toronto comes directly back to Fogo Island. And so I think about that as turning money into fish. And money can do that. We can turn money into supporting the things we love. That's the kind of rewiring of the economy. I think, that the unit of change is community. We cannot look after each other one by one. There's just too many of us. And I'm always amazed at how when we're talking about a problem, and pick any one, there are so many, poverty, we go from talking about the policy issue to talking about individuals, and we skip right past the community's role in any of this. When I say community, I mean a place, that people live in some kind of a tangle with each other. It doesn't matter how long they've been there. If you're living in the place, you're a part of that community. It includes the municipality, but the municipality is not the community. John McKnight talks about associations. On Fogo Island, I think we have like 50 or 60 associations for 2,500 people. It's like this organic life form. I'm going to talk a little later about the problems of the challenges of making communities function better, but let's agree what we mean. Oh, here I'll talk now about the challenge of communities. I think the biggest challenge we have is we're like fish swimming in the water and don't see the water. And when I say community, I probably mean something different than you mean. And we're not organized. And in many cases, especially smaller communities, we're like loose bundles of ends that never meet. And we do not have the architectures for collaboration inside a community, whether it's Halifax, whether it's a neighborhood in Halifax, whether it's Fogo Island. And we need to build that architecture where we come together in the interest, number one, in my mind, of the economy. Because if we can get the economy working for a community, then we can figure out if I want to play bingo and you want to go skateboarding, whatever we want to do. Our lives then have a foundation. This isn't going to happen all by itself. There needs to be a systemic tilt if we're going to create an economy, a national economy, let's say, that's made up of the sum of a whole bunch of community economies. We have kicked off We Shore Fast. As my brother says, there are just too many we's. Which we are we now talking about? I'm talking about Shore Fast in this sentence. We have kicked off a community economics pilot project that is aimed at this question. How do we strengthen community economies? We're taking the frame of our pilot from a book called The Third Pillar by a fellow named Rajan, who is at the University of Chicago, used to be head of the Bank of India. And he asserts human societies rest on 3 pillars: governments, markets or business, and communities. And the community pillar has been so badly eroded that it's unable to perform its function. And we, meaning in his words, we meaning businesses and governments, need to get together with communities to strengthen that pillar. And that's sort of how we frame the pilot project. We are partnered with Mary Rose and her people at the at the CUI, and with Community Foundations of Canada, and with the Coady Institute, who I'm sure is no stranger to anybody here, who know more about economic development before I was born than I know now, probably. It's a year-long pilot. Our intention is that it will become a kind of institute or network. We haven't quite figured out the noun for it at the end. There are 5 prototype communities in our pilot project: Fogo Island, Hamilton, South Island, which is in Victoria, BC, Prince Edward County, and London. So some are urban, some are rural. When I say community, and Mary Rowe and I come to realize this, when she's talking or I'm talking, we always end up talking about the same thing. From an urban perspective or rural, it really doesn't matter. They're human communities. I think about Halifax as being the sum of a whole bunch of communities called neighborhoods. So everybody should have a favorite economist, I think. Mine is Elinor Ostrom, and she didn't believe the tragedy of the commons. She disproved it through studying communities that owned and managed property in common, and what is known as Ostrom's law is this: that which is possible in practice is possible in theory. These are the things we're focusing on in our pilot: how to attract and retain financial capital in communities, building capacity at the community level, data. We don't know what's happening to us, so things just happen, and the governance structures to be able to work together for more effective communities. My favorite question to ask people is, if you could put anything on a t-shirt that you wanted, that would be given to everybody on the planet in their own language, what would you put? I would put this and this. Most importantly, this. It matters who owns what, because owners decide the business model, and the business model determines the outcomes. I leave you with this quote from Jane Addams, and as you're reading that, and she's basically talking about our community life, if we're going to make our communities work, we absolutely need to get economic underpinnings that allow them to work. And as we think about how to do that, we mustn't over-focus on local alone, because local and global exist together. It's all a part of a relational world. We have to understand the levers of the global economy and make them work in our local places. And that's what I mean by optimizing for place. Thank you very, very much.